Welcome back, listeners, to That's a Good Card. Today, Ya will have the challenge of getting me to say, that's a good card. While Ya will be doing the convincing, I'll be playing the devil's advocate. And we have a little update about our Patreon. We've released our first free full episode as a free member access podcast. That's right, absolutely free. So take a look at the link down below for our Patreon and come check out the content. Also, now's a good time to remind you to hit that subscribe button if you're listening to us on YouTube. And please leave a comment below with your thoughts on today's topic, as well as suggestion for our next card. All right, yeah, let's get started. What kind of spice have you brought to us today?
Okay, today I brought a card I think is going to be a little controversial. It's a gut feeling. I just feel like the Reddit comments are going to have their way with me. But the card I'm talking about is Uba Mask. So, for those of you not familiar with Uba
classic.
Mask, it is a classic. It is a 4-cost artifact. It reads, if a player would draw a card, that player removes that card from the game face up instead. Each player may play cards he or she removed from the game with Uba Mask this turn. So, some things to clarify. It is a pretty straightforward kind of card. Like, if you would draw a card, you're just going to, including your first draw, you're just going to exile that card instead. And so,
it is a replacement effect specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you only have that turn to play that card.
That's true. It kind of turns everybody into Ob Nixilis in that way, where you're kind of flipping cards off the top and playing face up. Specifically, casting cards from exile is really interesting, but it also is play cards, so you can play lands from exile as well with this card. So you're not completely shut out from, hitting your land drops. But it's really interesting. This card's been around a long time. Came out in Kamigawa. So
Champions of Kamigawa.
Yeah, Champions of Kamigawa. Yeah, not the Neo one. Something I'd like to note as well is this art is just so cool. Something That's about the blue background on an artifact, with this cool Uba Mask, everything about the art is beautiful. Absolutely love the card. But yeah, it's something that's been around a while. So I'm interested to hear why now? That's going to be my big question for you, Ya, is just, hey, this has been around CEDH for a long time. It's been in and out. So why are we bringing it up now? So I'll hand it back off to you. Let's hear it.
Yeah, actually, it's a great question. So it was my turn to pick a card. And when I like to try to change it up, do a recommended card and then kind of just go through the top 16 of recent tournaments. And this sees play in this actually saw play in a top 16 in a Magda list. And it's when I did a Mox field looking for bracket 5 and just exactly bracket 5 decks. It shows up in 610 decks, predominantly Magda, overwhelmingly in Magda.
Yeah.
You see it also in a Feel Oswald deck. It's probably the second most common deck. And then
that makes sense.
Heliod, the mono white stacks. And then just kind of randomly, a Flubs deck. But when you think about it, it kind of makes sense.
This seems like a Flubs card.
Right.
It's just so troll.
But yeah, are you ready to get into why I think this card deserves to be played in more main decks?
Yeah, sure. And here's a question for you, and you might be getting into this. Are you trying to vie that this should be in more Magda lists, in more of these lists in general, or just that you want a lot of different lists to try this out?
I'm going to get into it a little bit, I think. It's actually one of the things I wanted to make sure
I'll let you cook.
Yep.
All right, sounds good. Let's get into those main points for it.
So the first pro I have for this is a bit of a theme. So last time we talked about, are you tired of this mid-range hell? The answer is blow it up. So it's a similar idea here. And I have, do you have the win, but Ristic player has a grip of cards and are being fed more? So flip the game on its side. We're in this really weird meta game where everybody's just trying to draw cards. And in fact, I was watching Comedian's top 16 where he recently did, it was the SCG Portland, and there were two blue farm lists, right? And one was doing normal blue farm things, and the other was doing more of I'm going to copy and I'm going to steal all of your Ristics and Mystics type of game plan, right? That's just kind of the meta game that we're in. And so myself, like you, kind of like to play kind of against that grain a little bit. But, we're playing up against a lot of Blue Farm, just a lot of Rhystic Studies, a lot of Mystic Remoras. And you're seeing the meta kind of shift towards these cards where people are playing Surgical Extraction, right? Not a lot, but we've covered the card before. And they're trying to kind of strip cards from hands, especially when they're trying to win, right? Or looking through graveyards so that we can kind of remove things as is needed. So this is kind of going to do the same kind of thing. It still lets the person kind of draw the card, but at least it reduces their chances of playing it against you until the end of that turn, right? So if you see a person flipping into like a Pact of Negation or a Flusterstorm, it's kind of your cue like to potentially not play into it that turn, right? Because at least you have more known information. And so I think the first thing that I'm getting at is like, it's giving us known information, right? And that can be a really big deal when you're playing a list like Obnixilis, you're playing a list like Rakdos, you're playing a list like Flubs, where you are kind of playing with your hand revealed. At least the way I play Rakdos, a lot of the times I'm Hellbent, and I'm playing with my whole hand out there for everybody to see. They're in exile, and I'm kind of built towards that engine where I can exile things and get my game plan going. But I think a lot of decks aren't going to be able to grapple with this type of gameplay.
I see. So the main point here, and I know we kind of touched around it, but it seems to me like you're saying the main point is that you're gaining knowledge, gaining public information from this, so on your opponents, and that in turn will make piloting into a win easier for you because you have more information. Is that the thought process? You
have more information. You're also kind of, again, like limiting the cards that they're getting, right? Especially if you're playing like a manual storm deck like Obnixilis.
The cards are unusable on your turn that they're drawing. So that's the key. If they're drawing into those Flusterstorms and Mind Break Traps, what have you, not only do you have the knowledge that those are gone, but you also have the knowledge that they aren't able to play those cards on this turn whatsoever. There's no likelihood that they have these things in their hand.
Right.
Uba Mask doesn't stop you from playing cards in your hand. Whatever cards that you have in your hand beforehand, you still have in your hand.
Yes.
And if you can figure out ways to get cards into your hand in other ways that aren't drawing, i.e., something like a Fomori Vault that we talked about, that's a good card. That can kind of get around an Uba Mask, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, when I have played in games where this is out, it's not always just everybody is face up, because there's always going to be some sort of hidden information. And there's a lot of value in holding a card back or holding multiple cards back when an Uba Mask is out, because you don't want people to feel like they have perfect information. So, I really like the first point. I think using it as a tool to gain information is really important. And also denying the potential of things getting exiled to something that may not be a May trigger, right? Yeah. So sure, some Rhystic Studies might be declined when it's not on their turn because they're not going to get the cards, but things like an Esper Sentinel, where you're forced to draw and forced to exile a card when it's not your turn, or something like Italian, where you're forced, you're going to be kind of burning some cards from your opponents.
Yeah, which actually kind of touches into my second point. And I think the main reason that we see this in a Magda, right, in anybody that's played Magda is, you want to remove Magda. And Magda is pretty easy to remove if you play like creature removal, right? It's just 1 damage. The biggest bane in a Magda's existence is probably an Orcish Bowmaster.
Yeah, probably more so than Opposition Agent, to be honest.
And this specifically shuts down an Orcish Bowmaster. Orcish Bowmaster won't see any card draws, and so it won't get any pings to start pinging down your little Dwarven army.
That's a good point.
And so if you're playing a deck that wants its your little guys to stick around, this is a card that you may want to consider, especially if you're not in blue. The little bit of research that I did right before we started recording, because Kyle mentioned it, is I did look up a quick article that Sam Black wrote. He wrote this like at the end of 2023,
like a year ago,
about
2
a year
years
ago.
Yeah,
2 years ago now. And he made mention specifically that this shuts down Sheoldred, the Apocalypse, Orcish Bowmaster. He didn't mention it, but it also shuts down a Smothering Tithe, right? Because Smothering Tithe is not going to see anybody drawing cards, so you're not going to have to pay that too. And so that also shuts down anybody's game plan that is trying to capitalize on the amount of card draw that we're seeing, right? That we've always seen in CEDH.
I'm giving you a golf clap right now because I actually hadn't thought about how it denies Orcish Bowmasters. I did kind of think about the Smothering Tithe part. But like you said, if you're playing a deck that Orcish Bowmasters is the bane of your existence, something like a Magda, maybe something like a Tyam that has a bunch of dorks out that have one butt, before they start getting pumped up if you're putting 1/1s or whatever. I think that's interesting to be able to basically shut down one of the, I'd probably say, let's think. I'd probably say Orcish Bowmaster is a top 15 card in terms of its power level in the format.
It feels like it.
I'd place it. If somebody said top 10, I wouldn't. I don't know if shake my head at them.
Yeah,
top 15 is pretty high, but I think that's approximately where it's at, in my opinion. But anyway, I like that point. I like that point a lot. I think that's really cool to be able to deny some of the more powerful pieces that people are potentially even mulliganing for. Right. It doesn't happen super often, but sometimes, let's say I'm in a pod where I'm playing against a Magda. Or sometimes even just like if I'm playing against a Malcolm heavy deck, like being able to keep an Orcish Bowmaster to kill something that's a really big part of whatever their game plan is can be really important. So sometimes I'm keeping my mulligans with Orcish Bowmaster in mind. I know a lot of players who are playing white keep mulligans with the thought of an early Smothering Tithe in mind. So I like that point a lot. I think if it's affecting more than just the forefront, which is, Mystic and Ristic, and not being able to, people not being able to get the full use out of those, and then you throw in Orcish Bowmasters and Smothering Time as well. It's very interesting that we see a card that denies all of these different types of things, because they all do different things. Sure, they're all affected, like, card draw based, but they're all very different. You know what I mean? Like Ristic and Mystic are always plugged together because they're the same thing, but Smothering Tithe is very different from them, and then Orcish Bowmaster is very different as well. I like that point a lot. Excellent point.
And then my last point kind of it's kind of a similar idea, but I've been putting together Hashiton, and I realized like a lot of decks are kind of playing with like this, like I've been drawn to a lot of decks where I want to discard cards, right? And this card specifically kind of shuts me down. Right,
because you can't get the hard cards in your hand in the first place.
Right,
That's really funny, actually.
And specifically, you can have to discard. Right,
but you don't. But you can't get cards into your hand in the first place.
Right.
Yeah, I get what you mean. That's actually really funny.
And so that led me down a thought where this actually also shuts down a Force of Will. At least if your opponent exiles, again, this touches on my first point a little bit. If your opponent exiles a
all the
Force
pitch
of
cards,
Will,
really.
Right? All of the pitch cards.
Force
Anything
of
where
Vigor,
you have to discard a card in order to pay its alternate casting costs, unless they have a card in hand, right, that they haven't cast yet for whatever reason.
Pretty unlikely. Like they probably have like 1 to 3 cards, I feel like, that they're like okay with not playing.
This shuts those down. And they have to hard cast
100%.
Those cards. It shuts down any of the channel lands or the channel abilities in general, right? And so let's say you cast your silence and you're like, the only thing you're hoping to like, that can blow
dodge.
You up is like a Boseiju, a Otawara,
sure.
your Touch the Spirit Realms.
I get what you're saying. Like, it doesn't shut those down because if those cards are in your hand.
Yes, in the hand.
Yes. But it stops you from drawing into those cards that can be really useful.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I see you. I'm not going to lie. I've been a little hesitant on this card when you brought it up. I didn't veto it, but I was like, okay, let him cook. Let him cook here. And it's very interesting, some of the points that you've brought up. Just your thought process around them. I very much enjoyed it. So I like those points so far. Do you have any other points?
Yeah. Their last part is my fun facts. I think that the decks that can definitely play this, can definitely consider playing this, right? Without really slowing its game plan. I've already mentioned Rakdos the Muscle. I've mentioned Obnixilis. I think that Yuriko can play this card. Because Yuriko, doing Yuriko things is putting cards into hand, right? And so Yuriko is still going to gain card advantage while hopefully shutting out like other decks that are playing its Rhystic and Mystic. It doesn't care about like necessarily drawing. Yes, it's in blue Dimir, so it's playing its own Rhystic, its own Mystic. But at the same time,
non-bow.
It's a little bit of a non-bow, but at the same time, you're still going to get cards into your hand where your opponents are not, right? And you
break parity,
right? Yeah. You can still break parity and get cards into your hand through your own commander, which is so easy to cast, so easy to kind of recur. It's not as big of a deal. And then, I think you have to be really careful. I do think that deck construction, right? Something that I feel like you've been really leaning more into in our discussions is really key here. This is not a card you just slam in. You do have to be really mindful of like all of the non-bows, right? I think that if you can start considering this if you're non-blue, right? If you're non-blue, you're not already playing the Mystics and Rhystics, and you're looking for card advantage in some capacity, this may be your way, especially if you're not going to try to win at instant speed, right? If you're not trying to win at instant speed, and you think you can get away with like, you don't have like an card engine that happens on somebody else's turn, this might be a way for you to break that parity for yourself and give you an advantage by knowing what information is, hopefully exiling cards away that people need to discard, like any of those free counter spells. I think it's a really interesting card to start playing around with in this current meta. Yeah.
And something, since you mentioned the instant speed, I think this card has a weird effect when it comes to winning on other people's turns, right? On one hand, if you already have the pieces in your hand, it's easier to win on someone else's turn when this is out because it almost protects you. But at the same time, it's a lot harder for you to construct a hand that can actually win on someone else's turn when you have it. So it's really weird. It's like, if you have the nuts in your hand and you're just ready to win, then Uba Mask will protect you and you can still potentially find a win on someone else's turn. That being said, there's a big downside to that of like, are you able to put yourself in a position where you have cards in hand to win on someone else's turn? Probably not, right? All of those flash cards that you would need, or any of the cards that you would generally build up on other people's turns. Like, let's say, a very normal situation, let's use an example, would be someone going for a storm turn and feeding a bunch of Mystics and Rhystics on that turn, right? And as they're storming off, let's say it's a Krogsaka and they're feeding a fish and a Rhystic from the other players, like the reason why those other players are normally able to attempt to win on top or win on someone else's turn is because they're being fed like 8 to 10 cards before eventually finding like, oh shit, this is a Born Upon the Wind, a Thassa's, and a Demonic Consultation. Okay, let's rip it, So like the likelihood of having those things in hand and not drawing into it while someone whiffs their storm turn is very low. So I think overall it shuts down more than it helps people winning on someone else's turn. But it is interesting to think about that. In a perfect storm, it could play against you in that way.
I agree. Yeah.
Cool. And then you got to mention this last fact that you've been not talking about, which is like the OG reason of why Uba Mask was played a lot.
I was actually going to leave you for that if you wanted. That's why I didn't mention it. Just in case.
Just mention it. In case people don't understand how like the OG, like why this is like quote unquote OP. Go for it.
If somebody plays, or if you play your own Drannith Magistrate, you shut out your opponents from casting any cards that get exiled with Uba Mask, right? Or exiled at all, right?
Drannith Magistrate plus Uba Mask OP.
Yeah.
And it's asymmetrical, so it's not hitting you because Drannith doesn't care. So it's a very, very potent lock. It's not a hard lock, but it's a potent lock. It's very interesting.
And I'm not shy about that because, again, I've played Obnixilis and Rakdos the Muscle before, and a Drannith Magistrate is going to shut me out of my game plan anyways. It's going to shut me down anyways. My game plan is kind of moot And I've been able to, like I said, like you do have to be careful. You have to know deck construction and what the meta is. And it's a card for really careful thought, I think.
Yeah, it's very interesting that the most popular deck that's playing it right now doesn't have access to its like quote unquote combo piece. I think it's kind of funny, right?
Right.
Like Magda's mono red doesn't have Drannith Magistrate, that's for sure. It's seeing play, which is really cool, but it also doesn't have that like spice of being like, hee hee, 2-card combo, 6 mana, seems pretty good.
Yeah.
It's not the worst thing I've ever seen. So it's kind of interesting. Food for thought.
Yep.
Anyway, any more positives before we get into the downsides?
No, that's it. Let's talk about some downsides.
All right, time to bring up some downsides for Uba Mask. And, I'll start off with the low-hanging fruit, because a lot of people have asked me to talk about low-hanging fruit and then get into the fringe points.
Go ahead.
So I'm going to do that. The low-hanging fruit
Let's
is like, the CMC is 4 on this card. This is a 4-cost card. Instead of the One Ring, you could be playing Uba Mask, which is a stacks piece. Historically, in CEDH, well, maybe not. It depends on how far back you go. But of the past 3 years of CEDH, stacks has not done well.
Nope.
And maybe that's the tournament brain in trying to find wins within 80 minutes. Stacks pieces can, generally speaking, be really difficult to play. And at 4 cost, a lot of times what's going to happen is it's just not coming down before the Mystics and the Ristics turn 1, turn 2, have already gotten their full grip of cards in hand. And now you're playing this weird game where you've kind of put a protection piece on the board. So I that's just the first and foremost point. It's really high cost. And if you put it down turn 3 or turn 4 after people have already drawn a bunch of cards and have 7, 8 cards in hand, have already maybe even tutored once or fired off 2 tutors if they're really lucky, like you're just putting yourself in a position where now you're playing the stacks piece that can protect other people from who have already established their wins on turn 2, or not maybe necessarily aren't going for the win on turn 2, but that's like turn 2, they've tutored and now have a win in hand because they, in their starting 7, they had 1 piece. You know what I mean? So that's just my low-hanging fruit is like, this thing is hard
totally
as
fair.
frick to cast. It's 4 cost. So low-hanging fruit. Kind of piggybacking onto that into a more fringe point. I think if we kind of break down what this is trying to do and what this has historically been played for is to punish the draw pass control strategies that are going to be gaining a bunch of value on other people's turns, right? Espers, Ristics, Talions, all the things we mentioned. But it's really interesting because weirdly, like those decks that the card is trying to punish are the ones that can deal with it the easiest for 2 reasons. One, it's a non-creature spell, which means the Fierce Guardianships are hitting it. Like that, all of the counter spells besides Flusterstorm, really, and if you're playing Dispel, I guess, are going to be able to hit this thing as an artifact. So it's easy to counter. And then 2, it doesn't have flash or any sort of like ways that are common to cheat it into play. So you're not going to have a gotcha moment to like catch these decks off guard, right? They're always going to have a point of interaction where they're going to be like, hey, here you go. Barring, I guess, a Magda activation. And here's the thing. I'm not a Magda pilot. You're a Magda pilot, so you can talk to me about this. If a Magda pilot is using their first tutor on an Uba Mask, at that point, what are we, turn 3? Like, I'm kind of happy that they're not just like winning the game or putting out a God Pharaoh statue instead or a Portal to Phyrexia. Like, I feel like there's much more like scary things to hit the board than an Uba Mask, but that's just me. Like, what are your thoughts on it as a Magda player? I guess it just depends on the board state.
I think that's okay because sometimes, like, as a Magda player, you don't want the eyes on you, right? Like, the fact that you mention a God Pharaoh statue, a Portal to Phyrexia means that you're now like, okay, let's say the Ristic Study player was the target. Now it's like, no, like they can say, no, it's the Magda player. And Magda kind of doesn't want eyes on him. Right. Or like, know that I think that okay, shoot, like I'm 4th seat. There is now already a Mystic, a Ristic, and like you just know that guy who has the fish just tutored for a Ristic Study. And you're feeling like, ooh, that Corvold player just also their only game plan is to tutor up a Orcish Bowmaster to control the board. Right. And where's that thing going to be pointed? Your Magda. And so I think that's why you're seeing this in so many. Like, you're trying to control what you can control. and go for the long game, right? And some of those Magdalists are going for the.
But if all of those things have already been established, if you're looking at the board and you see Mystic, Ristic, like the cards have already been drawn by that point.
Not necessarily. The engines are there.
If multiple have already been cast, they're triggering each other at a minimum. So I guess it depends. Like, sure, if you have a Magda activation when, your 3 opponents have mulliganed really low and they've just dumped their hands with rocks, and now you're thinking to yourself, like, okay, it's time for me to get an Uba Mask because there's ain't no way I'm going to be protecting other people's wins. Because if you're using your Magda activation on an Uba Mask, you are not winning that turn.
Yeah,
unless
that's fine.
Like you're not winning.
Yep.
So you are
Yep.
activating Uba Mask, passing the turn,
Yep.
or if you're activating on someone else's turn, somebody's going to have a turn before you get your turn again, and you're able to untap your dwarves.
Yeah.
So it's just so, I don't know. It seems really high risk. It's kind of like playing like D-Grid Pass to me. It's kind of what it scares me a little bit to be able to be like, okay, D-Grid Pass, which I'm talking about Defense Grid. For those of you who don't know, it's just an artifact, 2 CMC, everything casts 3 more to cast when it's not your turn. Something along those lines. I'll put it on the screen.
And the last thing I'll say is like, you just spent your turn setting up your board, and like, okay, now people are definitely going to gun down your board, right? And it's because like that's just the way Magda plays sometimes. Sometimes you have to play your dorks, and you're just hoping to get back to your turn with your board intact. And Uba Mask almost guarantees that without. And the more I talk about it, again, I don't play Uba Mask in my list, but the more I talk about it, the more I can totally see like, oh, yeah, that's the reason I would go and grab an Uba Mask before my next turn, right?
It's incredible if people don't have cards in hand. If people have cards in hand, I think it's not great. And I'm going to lead this. There's another time where where Uba Mask is not great. And I'm going to use this to go into my next point.
Go ahead.
Which is against manual storm players who like to storm on their own turn.
Agreed.
They do not give a shit.
Yeah, they don't
about
care.
Uba Mask.
And that's the players I'm trying to get at, right, for this card.
So like for me as a Korvold player, I am a main phased Korvold player. Like the deck has always played like that. It's like I am trying to win on my main phase. Sure, I have crop rotation into Emergent Zone, but I'm in Jund. I don't get cool stuff like Valley of Floodcaller or High Fae Trickster
Emergent Zone or
Born
Bust.
Upon the Wind. It's literally Emergent Zone or Bust. So, or a sick Summoner's Pact. Or not Summoner's Pact. Sorry, I said that wrong. Savage Summoning.
Savage Summoning.
So, yeah, exactly. But I could use the Summoner's Pact to go grab a green creature to then bam.
Bam.
Boom, goes the dynamite. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that players who manually storm in their turn just don't care. Something like a Korvold, something like a Ral, which has been seeing a ton of play. I just got cooked at my last tournament. Ral top forward. Shout out Tyler. It is not going to affect those decks whatsoever. So in those events, and not only that, but normally those decks are like a little quicker. So like then your Magda plan of like, let me tutor this Uba Mask is even worse because you now have shut out the control players from being able to get fed cards to interact with the players that are just trying to win on their turn anyway. They don't care where they're casting their spells from. They don't care if they're casting them from hand or exile. It doesn't matter. They're just casting their spells. So that kind of leads to my second point, which is just main phase storm players could care less about this card.
And those decks can play Uba Mask.
Oh, that's a hot take.
Those decks
I don't
can
think
play,
I would play
right?
it.
Like those decks can play it because they don't care.
I just don't know.
I think that the big thing for me is, again, like I don't always have protection, right? In like the colors that I like to play, which is like Rakdos, Mardu, right? Like it's just I don't always get the same type of protection that some of these
but
other
if you're
decks.
looking for protection strictly, I feel like Defense Grid as an answer is half the cost of Uba Mask.
It's a 2 cost,
and it will protect you immediately. No, it's 2 cost and things cost 3 more. So it's so difficult for me to want to, and that's like on the low end of protection, right? Defense Grid has always been kind of like the kind of the lower end of the protection just because it's so easy to counter. So anyone who's played Defense Grid as protection knows how easy it is to counter. So it's just going back to my first point, where now you're getting your Uba Mask countered instead of your Defense Grid countered. You paid 4 instead of 2. That's rough. I'm really hesitant when it comes to using it as protection. I think you look at it in terms of, how do I put this? If I want to rank the role this card plays. It's stacks 1. I think it fills 3 roles: stacks, combo, and protection. I would argue like stacks is 1 by far of what it does. Like it slows the game down. It makes it more difficult for the people to navigate. That's fine. I understand that. The second part, I actually think is comboing with Drannith Magistrate has more relevancy than playing this as protection, just because of the better protection options that you just have. A la Defense Grid. Like, that's literally just it. It's just like, even Vexing Bubble, way better, in my opinion, if you're just playing something to fill the role of protection.
You just said something that made me think about how it's funny. I know this card is intrinsically a stacks piece, but I'll be honest with you, until you said it outright, I don't think of it that way. Maybe it's just because of the way I like to play the game with like kind of like a little bit balls to the wall, right? You're saying it like it's going to slow down the game a little bit. And in my head, it's like, well, no, not really, because I am one of those manual storm decks where if I saw this, I would be like, cool. Like you said, I'm fine. I feel like with the decks I like to play, I can kind of jam through this, right? It does really slow down the blue players, I think. It's not uncommon for me to sit down to a like no blue pod, but it's not that uncommon. It's not that common, right? Where
it happens.
It does happen
in my
on
last
occasion,
tournament,
right?
Yeah.
And so, like a card like this in a non-blue pod, yeah, if you draw this, you're like, ooh, this is not a great card at this time at all. I agree with you there, for sure. I definitely do.
And then my last point for this card is very similar to like almost any stacks piece that's being played, but I actually think it is really bad playing out of position. If you're playing in the last seat, like 3rd, 4th seat, and you haven't established as much, like it kind of sucks to play Uba Mask, because Uba Mask will intrinsically incentivize people to jam on their turns.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because when they're drawing cards on their turn, they're like, shit, I either play it now or I lose this card, right? So they're incentivized to jam on their turns. If you are playing this in 3rd or 4th seat, and then you better be able to stop seat 1, who's going to be untapping with more resources. They're the first ones that have to deal with this effect. Maybe that's true if you're 4th seat. But at the same time, they're already a step ahead. And now, seat 2, seat 3, who's established their Ristic or Fish, they can't help you. So if seat 2 just has it, you've just thrown the game. Or sorry, if seat 1 just has it, you've just thrown the game. So I very much worry that if you don't have good seat position, that this card could be detrimental, and you can play it wrong. That being said, I get it. All stacks pieces can be played wrong. Yeah. And we've talked about that in
for sure.
multiple podcasts.
Yeah.
If you haven't listened to our podcast on Containment Priest, go check that out.
Yeah.
We talked about stacks extensively on that podcast. But yeah, when you play this card, you best be able to stop somebody from winning the game, because you're giving them that slight level of protection, right? So it's the same thing with Vexing Bubble. Same thing with Defense Grid. That's why you don't play these things and pass. The only cool thing is that Vexing Bubble, you can sacrifice it at any time. So like, that's the one that's like, in my head, the best of these kinds of like pseudo stacks pieces, because you're in the driver's seat. If somebody flashes you a Force Will and says, yeah, I can stop it if you pop your Vexing Bubble, then you go, okay, cool. I popped my Vexing Bubble, you know? So like, you can't, if Uba Mask had a pay 1 and sacrifice Uba Mask, this card would be way better.
Or an effect like that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, 100%. So that's my last point. You know, I guess I'll talk about the Drannith lock.
Yeah,
I guess if I had to poke at it, it's just like, it's a 2-card combo, but it's a soft lock, so it's not foolproof. Let's just say that.
Not at all.
And especially not in a tournament sense, when you have to close the game out. Like, people still get to play their turns. People still get to go to combat. People still get to activate their abilities. It's a soft lock, and especially since even if you're able to trigger like pseudo draws and turn them into exile, you can still flip into a land that can stop the lock, specifically Talon Gates. So like, if you're just, everyone's locked, and then you're like, okay, draw for turn, I'm going to replace it by putting this Talon Gates into exile, and you go, oh, cool, I'm going to play this Talon Gates from exile as my land for turn, target Drannith. Okay, cool, I'm unlocked. Like, that can happen. Is a fringe point. But I'm just trying to poke holes at this.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Because like, generally speaking, I'm like, yeah, like if you're going to play this, I personally, like, I'm not 100% sold on the Magda, and I know Magda plays it a lot. I would love for the Magda players in the comments to talk to me about why Uba Mask is so good and stuff that we missed. Please do so. But I would want to play this in a white deck. Like, I don't think I would be incentivized to play this in a deck that doesn't have the ability to combo with one of the most powerful pieces in white, in my opinion. But that's just me. But yeah, that's my last point.
Yeah. Thanks, Kyle. This was actually a really good discussion. I actually thought I wasn't sure about this one. Yeah. Even I was like, oh boy.
Way to instill faith for our listeners. Okay. Yeah, what point of mine did you think was the biggest downside for Uba Mask?
The fact that this just kind of incentivizes, this is kind of an upside and a downside, right? Because it's just the way my brain works for some of this is that it incentivizes people to jam on their turns, right? And yes. You can potentially prevent somebody from that could normally stop the game, like stop a win attempt from stopping the win attempt, right? Like that is definitely a thing, and this is kind of like a very it's like you hold the power, and whether or not you should actually like use that is really kind of key, right? Like you said, there are decks like yours that like Corvold probably doesn't care, right? It'll jam into it. Like you're just playing with
Same
your
with
hand
Ral.
revealed, right? Ral.
We don't care.
Obnixilis, like I said, I don't think Yuriko really cares about that.
There's a bunch of decks that don't care, and those are the decks that are going to get king made if you play this card at the wrong time. Yep. You know what I mean?
But that's true. Like, and like we've talked about before, that's always true of like almost any type of these pieces.
Yeah, any stacks piece.
Yep.
Any stacks piece.
But yeah, that's a really strong point to me. What point of mind do you think supports for why you should consider this card?
I think it was the point that I said surprised me, which is that it affects not just the Mystics and Aristics, which are the powerhouses of the format, but also the Smothering Tides and the Orcish Bowmasters. And I really like that now we've doubled the number of CEDH staples. Like, these are cards that we see every single game of CEDH.
Yeah, a lot of them.
I don't know the last time I played a CEDH game where I didn't see at least one of Mystic, Ristic, Orcish Bowmasters, or Smothering Tithe. It's been years. I don't think that, like, I literally don't think I have played a game where that's the case. No, Smothering Tithe. I was going to say, we did play that one night where everyone was playing monocolored commanders, where it was like Crick, Magda, Godo,
Selvala or something.
Selvala, yeah, exactly. And like that would have been the only time where that happened.
Right.
But other than that, like, these cards are played every single game of CEDH. So if you're playing something that can, thwart those things, awesome. I love it.
All right, Kyle. With that said, it's time. Did we get you to change your mind? Do you think that Uba Mask is a good card?
So I'll give credit where credit is due. I think you actually had some really good points, some of your best points in the podcast in a long time. So I will give you a round of applause for that. Listeners, yay! I will say that you swayed me. I don't think Uba Mask is a good card.
That's fair.
I had very low opinions of this card in general. And you know what? I'm a Corvold player. Corvold stand through and through. So if it can't stop me, then obviously I'm like, okay, then maybe it's not a good stacks piece. But that being said, maybe it's my bias. I was very low on this card coming into this. I've been very aware of this card. I've seen this card a lot. I just, you move the needle a little bit, but it still, to me, it still belongs in the considering pile. So I think you did a good job. I think you made some really good points for it. I don't think that the Magda players who are playing it, I don't think it's necessarily troll of them to do so. I think it's one of those things where if they just naturally draw into this thing, or it's in their opening hand and they're able to play it early somehow because, Grim Monolith, whatever, have you. I think it can be really interesting in those cases. I don't think you'll ever tutor for it. And please, Magda pilots in the comments, let me know if you ever Magda activation for Uba Mask. It just seems wrong to me. But you never know what the board state's like. You never know when people just have 0 cards in hand and whatever hellish situation that you're in. But that being said, I think you did a great job. But unfortunately, no, I don't think Uba Mask is a good card.
If you think, or if you disagree with Kyle or me for any of these points, don't forget, leave a comment below, let us know, or join our Discord and have a conversation with us.
Yeah, thank you to everybody who's joining our Discord recently. I started making those little Discord forum chats. I don't know if y'all listeners have noticed that. Just so that you can talk directly about the episode that we're posting. And I also post the links to the episode in there as well. Shout out to the Howling Salt Mine for giving me that idea, and Sam specifically for giving me that idea. So appreciate y'all. And I'm glad that we can have a place where we can kind of talk about this. So all the Magda pilots get in here and flame me for calling Uba Mask bad. So that'd be great. Anyway, all right, yeah, it's that time for our favorite closing segment. That's a good card, question mark? If you haven't played with us before, what we're going to do is Ya is going to give me the name of an obscure magic card, and it's going to be my job, as well as yours, the listener, to guess everything about this magic card. Color, type, cost, flavor text, art, everything. Be sure to pause the video after Ya gives us the name of the card, play along, post your guess in the comments, post your guess in the Discord, whatever you want. All right, Ya, what card have you got for us today?
Okay. I actually had a couple choices, and I have I have decided to go with Eye for an Eye.
Eye for an Eye. Oh, man, this one's got me in a mental pretzel, because this is the two visions I have, and I bet you I'm going to pick the wrong one. On one hand, it's giving biblical energy. So like old magic cards, which could be like a white card, you know, like eye for an eye. I think that's some sort of biblical thing. And then on the other hand, we have the side of me that just like hopes it's like this grungy goblin with an eyeball and a stick that like stabbed somebody and took their eye out. And it's like really metal as hell. So I'm going to go with that one. So I'm going to say that it is a Rakdos card. We're going to say it's we'll do one colorless and one Rakdos hybrid pip. And it's an instant. And the art is, like I said, a goblin, a gabagool type creature. With like a skewer with like somebody's eyeball on it and like some sort of person / humanoid / critter with an eyeball missing on the ground, like, you took my eye. So that might be the flavor text. So it's an instant, 2 cost, and it's going to say, the next time, I almost just rewrote Deflecting Palm. So maybe, Eye for an Eye. You know what? Maybe I'm switching up. It's not an instant anymore. It's an enchantment. I'm going to say it's an enchantment that says anytime one of your creatures would be dealt damage, deal 1 damage to target creature and opponent controls. And the flavor text reads, my eye!
All right. Is that all you have to say for Eye for an Eye?
Yeah, if it's like a white card, I'm going to be really sad. I really hope it's like actually stealing somebody's eye.
I'm totally giving you half points here. So let's go through this whole thing. Your first instinct was correct. This is originally from Arabian Nights. So it's pretty old.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
It is a white card.
Damn it.
It is 2 costs, though. You got that right.
Oh.
It's an instant. You got that right.
No, I switched it to enchantment.
Okay. It's
my
2
God.
white pips. And the effect, you got so close with the effect. You actually got so close. I'm going to read you the original wording, right? Here it is.
Yeah, hit me.
Can be cast only when a creature or spell does damage to you. Eye for an Eye does an equal amount of damage to the controller of that creature or spell. If some spell or effect reduces the amount of damage you receive, it does not reduce the damage dealt by Eye for an Eye. So essentially, right, it's redirecting damage.
Yeah,
not redirecting.
I was around there.
It's also doing damage back to
redistributing. Yeah. It is deflecting palming, kind of.
It is,
but deflecting palm prevents.
Right.
So,
and there is no flavor text.
I'm guessing the art wasn't a goblin with an eye on
not
stick.
A goblin. It is a bald man that is very muscular with this awesome goatee, like almost like a Salvador Dali.
See it. Oh my gosh! Yeah,
holding an executioner's sword,
mustache.
Yeah.
That's like a big old scimitar. That's a steel scimitar from RuneScape right there.
This is very classic magic art to me, right? Like just so classic. The style, the whole thing.
Oh yeah, everything about it. The even the background color. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like the sandy sky. Yeah. Pretty cool. Pretty classic.
Yep.
All right. I should have gone with my gut instinct, but you know what? It's okay. Sometimes you just gotta give it to the gabagools.
Cool.
Also, wait, while we're talking about this, as a part Italian man, I want to speak on a comment we received where somebody said, oh, what was it? It was like, oh man, somebody joked about me, the way I pronounced Italian. On the birthing ritual episode, I said something along the lines of course I want Italian. Like, space, Italian, the kindly Lord. But then somebody commented, I want Italian too. Like, for dinner? I died. That was one of the best comments we've ever gotten. So I've never thought about saying Italian as being Italian. So shout out that commenter. So it made me laugh really hard. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode on Uba Mask. And thank you so much to our patrons for supporting us on Patreon. Don't forget to check out our free Patreon content. Once again, you literally just have to have a Patreon account and become a free member of our Patreon in order to get a full 45-minute podcast. So go ahead and join us on there and check out our Discord as well. So I'll post links down below to everywhere that we post our podcasts as well. Thank you so much for supporting us each and every week. And thank you for listening. All right, see you next Monday. Bye.